just feel right. I'm just getting off the train.
All right, all right, all right. Good morning, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully, let's see, hopefully everyone can hear me. I am going solo today without my lovely co-host and technical expert. Let's see, we are the Sole Purpose Show, heard every Saturday on In Touch News Internet Radio, where everyone is a star. And I am your host Keith. And as I mentioned, and this is a special edition, by the way, of the Soul Purpose Show. But as I mentioned, my lovely co-host Monica is not with me. As you can see behind me is our set, but I'm actually solo today. Let's see. I'm typing in our salutation to all of our listeners. Trying to go live here, and I'm going to jump right into our subject today. It's actually fitting that I am by myself today because everything happens for a reason, and timing is everything. And quite honestly, I'm really glad to have and proud to have joining me today a collection of brothers, of black men to talk about a subject that everyone is talking about, and that is this kind of this racial reckoning that we're having as a country, and frankly, it's no better time than the present to really talk about how we're feeling because there's nowhere you can go, there's nowhere you can um, be without hearing kind of multimedia and the mass media really discussing the issues of the day, which are all of the things that we're seeing, all of these images on the news, and everybody has something to say about it. Everybody's talking about it, but unfortunately, sometimes there are some voices that kind of get overlooked. In this particular case, the most important voice is probably the voice of the individuals that are impacted the most and are feeling the most pain from it, and that is black men. So we are facing a tremendous challenge right now in our history, and our country is obviously still dealing with the impact of this global pandemic. But beyond that, we're also dealing with the pain of this racial reckoning. Um, so I'm gonna not delay a whole lot. I'm not gonna talk a whole lot. I have been asked the question outright by those who are in my circles and those who are close to me. Hey, black man, are you okay? And before I share my answer, because I actually do have an answer to that, but I want to bring in a collection of individuals today that have decided to give their insight, their very unique insight on this very subject. And so, joining me on today's show, first and foremost, he is a friend, but he's also an advisor and a consultant who happens to serve on the executive staff of one of our nation's most storied civil rights organizations. So I would like to please welcome Demark Liggins. If you can unmute yourself, how are you, sir?
I'm good, brother. I'm good. Good. How you doing?
Outstanding, outstanding. Thank you for joining us. And next, I want to introduce a dynamic young brother who has worked as a political consultant and an advisor, but he's also launched a very exciting initiative for budding investors and entrepreneurs. Hopefully, he'll have an opportunity to tell everyone about that a little bit later. Please welcome Joshua Bent. How you doing, brother Bent?
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for having me, man. It's been such a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Outstanding, and thanks for joining us. Next, I'm really honored to have to add to our conversation today a father and a husband, and also happens to be a member of the clergy, and he's going to help bring a lot of what we talk about today into perspective for us. So please welcome everyone, the pastor of New Progress Missionary Baptist Church, Reverend Maurice Taylor. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your perspective. We look forward to hearing from you. And then finally, I want to bring into our discussion an individual who I feel, is uniquely qualified to share his thoughts on the fate of Black men in this country. Having not only been born right during the height of the civil rights movement, but also carries the burden of since having fathered and raised 5 Black sons. He also happens to be the only grandfather amongst our panel of Black children. So, and he also happens to be my one and only my one and only blood brother. So please welcome everyone, Howard Harris III.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Outstanding. All right. Well, let's start this journey, guys, by just let's give our listening audience some insight into like why are we even here, right? I want to ask Demark, after all of the noise that's going on in the media, it's now, why is it necessary for us to be on a platform like this, specifically talking about our feelings?
Excuse me. I think it's incredibly important for a variety of reasons. One, um, I think that it's important for us to be able to share with people who even had the respect, like in your case, to recognize the pain and ask the question and not assume, hey, just share your pain with me, right? A lot of times in our personal spaces right now, people just kind of walk up and ask you without knowing you that well. They want you to share this incredibly deep pain with them or share it with all your coworkers. So I appreciate the intentionality and the way you approach it. I think that in and of itself is important. And just in general, I think, and I think every brother would agree that just this mix, and to be honest, it's really kind of chronic mix that always sits underneath our existence anyway, and it just keeps getting rescabbed and it's anger and it's sadness and it's disappointment and it's fear and it's all these things at once and they just keep scabbing over and over again. And so I think it's important to be able to share, to learn, and to lean on other brothers like these moments. So I think these conversations are just beyond important.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Josh, I know when we met a few years ago, you were actually probably not too far removed from college days, and I just, I saw you. There was a little bit of envy. I saw you as just kind of carefree, just kind of bright, promising young talent, and on and on and on, and with this bright, future ahead of you. It's easy for us to overlook the impact that seeing Black men, especially young Black men, literally being constantly, profiled, persecuted, for just living while Black, walking up and down the street. Share with us, what goes into your mind when you see these images.
I had an experience the other probably a couple of months ago where I was pulled over and instantly got like really nervous. And it's just one of those things where people don't necessarily understand what we go through mentally from an interaction with an officer. No matter where you're from, no matter what creed you come from, no matter what your social economic standing is, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's unfortunate, but when they see our color, and when I say they, now I want to be very clear when I speak on this topic. All police officers are not bad, but again, there are some who really kill the vibe for everybody. It's just, and it's unfortunate. And that's with a lot of organizations. It goes across the board. Nobody at your job is 100%. And there are always going to be some bad seeds. So we understand that, and I'm pretty sure we have brothers that we know personally as officers, and they're amazing men. So I want to make sure that that's out there. So we're not putting a bad light or a negative spotlight on a police officer, but again, the topic here we're addressing is the interaction and the community aspect of policing and how it affects us. So when we're speaking on that specifically, the images that you see and the conversations that we have to have, when my own mother texts me and calls me and says, hey son, just be safe tonight, like make sure you come home, that's not necessarily a conversation I really want to have. But I understand why she stops me and says, "Hey, I love you. Be safe. Call me if you need me." And I don't know if other races and cultures have to talk to their kids like that. Because it's an important conversation that is had amongst especially Black men. We had a whole conversation about how to interact with a police officer if you're pulled over. And I had a couple of other Black men give me some really good insight on some things that you could do to make your life a little bit easier. And one of those things was have your wallet or your license and registration right next to you, so you don't have to reach for it. Just put it right here. Everything's right next to you. So when you see those images, it definitely gets it almost gets to a point where you lose hope. You
Mhm.
know, it gets almost like a hopeless feeling. It's like, dang, like this sucks, and you just get so tired, and you almost get desensitized to all the violence. It's like, okay, here we go again. You know, I made the comment the other day. You know, somebody asked me how was I doing mentally with everything that's going on, and I looked at her and I said, "It's just another day in a black man's life. This is every day for us." And
Uh,
that and to speak to that's the point.
yeah, and you mentioned tired. You know, and that's a good segue, Howard. I mean, none of this is news for you. Like none of this is new. Like from the time that public schools were first integrated, public schools and neighborhoods were first integrated. During the '60s and the '70s. I mean, we've always been targets, right? Um, Josh mentioned some of the keep your hands on the steering wheel and have your stuff out, so don't you don't want to look too black. I remember Dad telling us when we had afros, like don't want to have your hair in braids and plaits because you're going to look too black. When you go out in public, and maybe you're going to be intimidating. How much of this is just a fatigue factor? For those of us and those of you who have been hearing this speech for so long. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
I do think there is a lot of fatigue, uh, but fatigue is just part of what we're dealing with. Um, it's just crazy at some point, and when you realize that we were taught that you get far in life based on the decisions that you make and the work that you put in. So it's hard work and making good decisions. Um, but what we've also had to deal with all of our lives is that beyond hard work and making good decisions, um, your life is going to be also affected by just who you are and what you look like.
Mm.
And I think that's frustrating. It's frustrating because we've all been taught. I mean, we are all on this panel reasonably successful people, and we've been taught what to do to make that happen. But education and training is no shield against what we look like. And what we look like is what gets us in this situation to where we're fatigued and we're tired, but by how we're treated. I'll just share two stories, and being the old guy on the panel, I have some years and some history with a few things. But you mentioned my five sons, and so one story I'll share is that one of my sons, and I used to live in, and I won't say the neighborhood, but let's just say it was an exclusive suburb here in Tampa. And two of my sons were assisting me with moving some items from my home one day. And they were out there working on this project for a couple of days, loading the truck, driving it away, coming back, picking up another load, et cetera, et cetera. One day, my son calls me, and I was at work, and he and my other son were working on this project. And he called me and he said, "Dad, they have me pulled over on the side of the road." And he was really distraught about it because he says, people are driving by. They got me stood up against the car. People are driving by and they're looking at me, and they're looking at me like I'm a criminal. And and there's two cop cars here. And he said, "I don't know what I did to, cause them to be suspicious of me." And come to find out, one of my neighbors called the cops on my son. And I guess what they thought was maybe he was doing something illegal, or, I don't know what they thought. But here it is, someone who lives in my neighborhood who has seen my son before calls the cops on him because at that moment he was suspicious to them. And for him, I felt for it. It made me angry, but I also felt for him because he got the same lesson that I got as a kid. Do the right thing, good decisions, carry yourself a certain way and you'll make it. And here he was being treated like a criminal just for how he looked. And the other story that I'll share real quick is one of my other sons was in a car with three of his white friends, and I got a call from the sheriff, who basically it was a courtesy call to tell me that my son wasn't in trouble or being arrested, but he wanted to let me know that he was in a car with some guys who there were rumors that there would be some trouble at the school and so forth and so on. And so what I took away from that, first of all, I had to thank the officer for calling me. And he said, oh, by the way, there are drugs in the car. And he said, we're not pinning this on your son, but I want to let you know that this is going on and you might want to have a conversation with your son. And I hadn't thought about it. So, I really hadn't given it a whole lot of thought up until that point that, oh man, when we talk about the conversation that we have to have with our kids, I hadn't had that conversation with him yet. And I had to right then and there. And there's several conversations, but this was a conversation to say, hey, if you're in a car with some guys and you guys are doing anything that looks like it might be, crossing the, if somebody's got drugs or somebody's got, hey son, it's going to be you more often than not that they're going to point to and pin this on. So you got to be real careful with who you hang out with and what you do when you're hanging out. And so, I've had plenty of conversations with all my boys since then, but it brought it home to me on that day that, hey, our kids can't just ride around and not be aware of their situation, and their situation is based in large part on what they look like.
Absolutely. And Reverend Taylor, Howard and I grew up in a Christian home. We were raised in the same Baptist church that you had the pleasure of serving on the staff of. So you are keenly aware of the values that were taught to us. And I don't claim to be a biblical scholar, by no stretch, but I know how I'm feeling right now. And after seeing what I'm seeing, and you being a Black father and a husband, and not really immune to turning on your television and seeing the same images. You know, how are you helping to reconcile those teachings, with those feelings? Because again, you're not immune from those feelings. But I know that angry and want to just kind of tear stuff up is not what we are taught to do, but it's absolutely what we feel like. So help us reconcile that, if you would.
Well, thank you for that question. First of all, I think it's important to understand that as a Black man, as a father, we cannot help but feel a certain way. As a Christian, you look at what's going on. I don't know how anybody can look at a man placing his knee on the neck of somebody for about 10 minutes and not feel a certain type of way. I don't know how anybody can look at a young man that turns away from law enforcement and yet still get shot in the back and not feel a certain type of way. I believe that God that we serve, represent, would be on the side of the oppressed, those that are dealing with the hurt, the pain, because you don't have to be a Black person to feel pain. And it's sad that somebody can see the same situation and turn a blind eye. But I believe the balance comes from the energy, what we choose to do with that energy. So like all of you, I get upset, I get sad when I hear of another young man, another Black young man get murdered, unarmed. And then you hear on the counter side, you hear of a mass murderer apprehended. So I get frustrated, but I believe the balance comes with how we use our energy. So we have to help our young men as much as we can to prevent another casualty. There's a lot that we cannot control, but what we can control is what we do with our energy, our anger. Um, we cannot, as was mentioned, we cannot internalize it, suppress it. We have to use that towards making positive change. And we have to collectively determine that we're going to rescue, train, mentor, encourage as many young men as we can so that they are not the next victims.
Well, let me
By
let me brag on us for a moment, Rev, because you're talking about us doing the right things, right? Everybody on this panel, like we've all been taught, stay in school, get an education, stay on the right side of the, trouble with the law, and on and on and on. Are we not immune from a lot of what we're seeing happening to a lot of the black men in a lot of these situations? Demark, I'm gonna ask you to weigh in on the fact that a lot of these situations, these guys, are not angels, right? There's some past history with criminal activity. George Floyd, clearly had traces of fentanyl and meth and in the system. I don't know about y'all. I have never gotten down like that. That's just not what I do. So the majority community might say, you guys represent what's right, and this doesn't really affect y'all.
Uh, and thank you for that question. I think to Reverend Taylor's point, when you talk about what do you do with your energy, these kind of conversations, um, I think the point is it really wouldn't make a difference what type of person you are, and I think that's part of one of the pains of the moment. Um, Across the board, I actually have a right to be a drug addict in America and not get shot by a cop. I actually have a right to have a record in America and not get shot. I actually could reasonably be actually in a crime unless I'm physically harming someone, have a right to live because we're not talking about justice for Black folk. We're talking about life. We're not talking about justice. I mean, if we were, that'd be a whole nother conversation that is also skewed against us. But we're not even talking about, we're literally begging to go into a criminal justice system that is already placed against us in the first place because we're talking about life. And I think it's really important in the conversations when people, like you said, to say, well, if he was that type of person and you're this type of person, it starts moving the needle the way that people wanted to when they mentioned this stuff in the first place. Um, they mention your background to sully your reputation because they want to get off of the issue. There's an inhumanity and sadism and bigotry that comes with this. These are not responsive. George Floyd was not killed because someone said they thought he was hot. The underlying crime, he may have, which it's been proven he probably didn't, had a $20 bill. Brothers have, warrants for relatively mundane or heavy things. They're selling loosies. They're behind on child support. Traffic violations. I mean, brother didn't die, but the brother, Lieutenant Navarro, had his tag. So my point being that, yes, we can have conversations on what type of person gets pulled or not pulled, but one, it doesn't matter. And I think the more we talk about the victim and who they were before that moment, it just helps the bigotry of the cop. Unless you were actually, but here's the thing: I think the brother said earlier, we don't have any issues with cops. I don't think people have a problem being policed, right? I think that when you see someone that's actively doing something wild and crazy, if something bad happens, no one gets upset about that. I'm not to be funny, but if someone was, hostage situation or something, somebody comes in and that person doesn't make it, you rarely see an outbreak on that, right? It's the moments where, the brother Brooks Brooks was around the corner from my house. He was sleeping in his car because he was drunk. That's what he was doing, right? He got shot for that, And I say that to say I think that though that makes a difference, I think the other side is that there's a danger. There's a danger in starting to put this perceived morality on when we can be treated human and when we cannot be treated human. Particularly as Christians, we can't afford to have a perception of where my morality hits and then my humanity starts. My humanity exists no matter who I am or what I do. right? I'm a human being. I'm a citizen of this country. I should be treated just like that. And if that, even if I am a criminal, I still want. I think Brother Taylor said it earlier. I want to be treated just like I was a serial killer. I hate to say it, but we watch white serial killers literally walk in rooms and kill people. We have brothers who go, well, not brothers, people who went and sat in church with people and shot them all. We don't get treated like that person, right? And I don't want to belabor my anger, but my point being, I do think that it's we have to be mindful to both look at ourselves, and everybody has to gird themselves and know who am I, and be our best selves. But as we advocate, I think it's important to always say there is no more perceived moral litmus test, because the other thing is that your perception could be off,
Mhm.
right? There are plenty of people who appear to be a certain way, like you said, they're not, they do look, you know, this way. I might have a big afro. I could have dreads. I could have locks. I could have tats up to my chin and on my eyeballs. I be a really good person. That's might be my thing. I could also be as clean cut as humanly gets, and I could be an awful human being. So the perception of morality should have no bearing on our civility and our morality and our humanity.
And I appreciate that, Josh. I'm gonna ask you to weigh in on the same question, especially this question around balance. Like you, again, not being so far removed from a lot of from the kind of the age group of a lot of these situations that we're seeing unfold before us. You've done the right thing. You've gotten yourself educated. You run with the right type of crowd, et cetera, et cetera. Like how do you tamp down some of this anger that you heard Demark, kind of referring to earlier?
For me, one of my biggest issues is messaging, and how black people, black men specifically, are portrayed to the mass community. So let's break that down. For example, the George Floyd situation. Yeah, he had fentanyl in his system. Yes, he was doing things that he wasn't supposed to do. But one of the messages that went out to mainstream America was that we, as black people or Black Lives Matter, wanted to make a bad man a martyr. And I'm like, y'all missing the point. That's not the issue here. It wasn't the fact of how he lived his life that we celebrated and made him a martyr because of that. That's not what we did. The issue was why he died and how he died, how he was murdered. That was the issue. So, the biggest problem that I have with these news outlets and just mainstream America is just how they frame our stories, how we're framed, how we're pictured. That's the problem. So when we actually start to break down and look at this topic here in context, when they portray us black men, doesn't matter who we are, it's always the violent picture, it's always the headline. So when you think about that, that goes into people's subconscious. So naturally, when they see a black man, they may be scared, so when we talk about this issue, you have people out there who just really don't add context to a lot of their rhetoric and their talking points. It's a bunch of talking heads. It's just the unfortunate part about it is these people have platforms and these people have religious followings of, unfortunately, ignorant people who can't get outside of their own box just to try to open up the key to experience life from another perspective.
It's
And
really
when you can't experience life and try to open your mind and your eyes to experience life from another perspective, you will always be finite in your thinking. You will always be closed-minded. And so I encourage anybody who's listening to this, black, white, green, or orange, if I would encourage you to experience a different culture, travel outside of the country, see how the world lives. Because when you get those experiences and you gain those gems of the world, then you're able to apply those to different situations.
That's good stuff. It's a good stopping point for us as well, because I know we got to take a quick break. When we come back, and I think I'm starting to hear a little bit of it as well. Different perspectives, right? It's like, how do we get the different perspectives? Like, how do we start listening to the other side? Monica and I had an opportunity on our last show to have some white advocates, white advocates, white allies on our show, actually talking about this new woke culture. And so when we come back from our break, Howard, I want you to share with us the history of wokeness, the history of allyship.
Wherever we
Thanks for joining
go,
us. This
we
is the Soul
about
Purpose
to
Show. We'll be back in a
bring
couple.
on the positive vibe. Wherever we go, we are gonna do what makes us feel right. I'm just getting off the train.
By now, we're all aware of the dangers of COVID-19. Like others with existing health issues, cancer patients are at a high risk due to their compromised condition. If you are newly diagnosed with cancer, your care likely can't wait. Moffitt Cancer Center is the best place for your cancer concerns and to provide guidance to help you plan your next steps. We're here for you. Call 1-888-456-2839 or go to moffitt.org/here for you.
Wherever we go, we about to bring on the positive vibe. Wherever we go, we
Right, all
are
right, all right.
gonna
Welcome back,
do
everyone, to the Soul
what
Purpose
makes
Show.
us
I'm your
feel
host, Keith.
right.
I'm without my lovely bride, Monica, my co-host this week. I want to do a quick shout out. The reason why she's not here is she's actually being recognized by her sorority at their regional convention as one of the authors that they're profiling. And as some of you know, she has written a couple of children's books and is actually working on getting her third book published. So I'm super, super proud of her, and we wish her the best. And I'm sure she's doing a great job. We this is an opportunity for us to talk as men, to talk as Black men, and what we've been talking about is really how we're feeling. And at the end of the day, thank y'all for asking, loved ones and supporters. But yeah, some of us are just not okay. And I'll share a quick story as to kind of what gave rise to why I wanted to do this week. I think it was Monday night. Just watching the news coverage, just ongoing that loop over and over and over and over. I started yelling at the television and got kind of frustrated because I'm yelling at the television, nobody's yelling back at me. They're not listening to me. I'm giving very clear instructions on what I think needs to happen in these situations, and they weren't responding back. And it just welled up at me to a point where I was like, you know what, I got to go take a walk. I need to take a walk outside, and it was at that moment when my wife said, "Go ahead and take a walk outside, but just be very very careful because it was already dark." And that really just kind of puts into perspective where we are. Howard, we have had an opportunity to have white friends throughout our lives, and coworkers and associates. Now we hear them using all of the terminology. They're using the terms like implicit bias and diversity and equity and inclusion and anti-racism, etc. Um, are we being lulled into a false sense of wokeness? This new this new vibe that's going around. What's going on, man?
Well, I look at it in a couple ways. First of all, I have to be hopeful that we are getting allies who have a little bit more sensitivity to our situation and are understanding the situation a little bit better. We know that there were lots of white faces in all of the Black Lives Matter marches, and there have been white faces that have advocated for us in various situations, and there have always been white faces advocating for our situation, even in the civil rights days of Dr. King. And there were white people who lost their lives uh, helping us fight that battle. So there's always been, I think, a subculture of wokeness amongst our white brethren, and we have to appreciate that. But we also um, need to continue to educate them as to what the issues really are. Black lives matter, but it's not just a slogan, and it's not just something to say. It matters to us because we're the ones that are being, killed. And so they need to have a sensitivity to what that must feel like and understand that this movement is also recognizing things like privilege, which is something I think is difficult for them to get their heads around. If you're the privileged one, you don't really understand. You're not aware of it. You just live in your privilege.
Mm.
And so they need to be educated further, not just to say that we matter, but that there are systems, and people are now talking about systemic racism and so forth, that there are systems um, and, and institutions in this country that have held us down and helped kept us back for since we've been in this country as slaves and freedmen and so forth and so on. So we appreciate the wokeness. We just need for that wokeness to not only continue but understand the whole picture. It's not just a slogan. Understand how we feel because we're being slaughtered and we're watching it happen.
Mm.
And we're not just protesting because we disagree with what's going on. We're protesting because this is our lives. This is deeply, deeply personal to us.
So Rev, how much of our culture impacts how we respond to this trauma? If we're raised in the church, we just pray it away. You know, pastor says, preacher says, just get on your knees and just pray, and God will make everything all right. So why are we out here protesting in the streets, and why are we being vocal? I mean, how much of our culture impacts, how we are processing this real trauma that we're facing?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think culture plays a big difference. When we look at where we are today, um, you can have young men who easily look at what's going on and say that everything is doom and gloom. But again, as we look at the panel, we are the recipients of constant struggle. Myself, Demark, Joshua, we are primarily recipients of our ancestors' struggle. So we have to be able to properly share with this generation that wokeness just did not appear, that the sacrifice began a long time ago. And as it pertains to our faith, it was prayer. Um, Dr. King and the civil rights leaders, Colin Kaepernick was not the first person to take a knee.
Mm.
The civil rights leaders, they took a knee in protest, but also in prayer. So I think with our culture, we have to understand that progress is not something that is immediate, but it is something that must be constant and consistent. We have to continually fight. My son, he's about to turn 7 in a week and a half. He wants to be a police officer.
Mm.
And the reason why he wants to be a police officer, he says, because the cops, they drive fast cars.
Mm.
But we have to work to help him understand, not be disillusioned, but to understand that we can help shape what's going on through our emotions, but also through our actions. So I think culture plays a big part in what's going on, but we have to help shape culture in a way that, as Joshua mentioned, that we are not depicted in a way that doesn't demonstrate our reality.
So, I appreciate that, Demark. You heard Reverend Taylor mention the civil rights struggle and the civil rights movement, and one of the individuals that had a prominent presence during that movement was John Lewis, and I know that you, or Congressman Lewis, I should say, and I know that you actually co-birthed an initiative um, around around what that meant and what that means for us, and how we can bring that into a contemporary perspective. Would you share a little bit with our viewers what that initiative was all about and why you decided to get involved?
Definitely. And to Reverend Taylor's point, when myself and Mark Spat sat down and we started My 54, that was an initiative that was born out of both Congressman Lewis and his passing, but also the great and late Reverend C.T. Vivian. Um, and for whatever it's worth, I do serve as the chief of staff for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so I had an opportunity to work with Reverend Vivian intimately close because he was there for a year. And of course, you can't be around and not be infected with both John Lewis's presence and his life's work. And so when you look at that and kind of what that means, we were talking about allyship earlier, right? When you look at their lives and what they were able to do with that presence of march, presence of protest, spiritually that protest for that matter, but how they attracted allies. They attracted, like Mark, the gentleman I started my 54 with, is one of my friends who is Jewish, right? He's not my Jewish friend. But um, that you see that you see those collaboration points, those points of connections, the little Louisos of the world who lost her life in defense of trying to help people of all spaces. I think it's incredibly important also to your point, even though I work for SCLC, and of course we can obviously talk about our legacy leadership. We start by Dr. King and Abernathy and Vivian, Lowry Young, etc. uh, but they will tell you about people who came before them. CT Vivian did work before he became part of SCLC. I mean, you can go back to from SCLC to from Dr. King to A. Philip Randolph, and go back from A. Philip back to uh, uh, Douglas and Du Bois, and of course the names and thousands of names of people that we would never know because they weren't memorialized in written word and all those moments of progress. And so I think it's deeply important. And so when we start something like a Mile 54, we wanted to focus on not just the history, but what can I do individually to show that sacrifice, right? It's not so much about being the next anybody. I always tell people you want to be the first you, not the next somebody else. Where are the things in my life, in that particular case, when we started my 54, what would I go 54 miles and walk in heat and with cops coming to my way? What would I do to put myself in a uncomfortable space for a greater good? And that may be advocacy. That may be being present with the young brothers in the community, like I think Brother Taylor was talking about that early, kind of how we present to each other. It may be being an ally at work. It may be having a deeply candid conversation with a curious ally who's not quite sure on what the best thing to do. I think Brother Harris spoke on that earlier as well. People are trying, right? And you got to meet them in their space. So the point of, and I don't want to be more long-winded, but the point of that was just all of us has our own 54 story. All of us has something that we can do to positively affect the world, even if it's a little uncomfortable when we first start. And I think that's I think that's a life lesson we learned from a John Lewis who always said, if you see something bad, just get in good trouble. You learn that from his life, just be present. A lot of what they did was just be present in the space and be present to do good. Reverend Vivian used to always say, good people, Demark, do good things. So I think that I think all of us can do that, and I think that's one of those things that we try to remember when you look at peoples like that who were so monumental. Ultimately, they did, and we remember them because they decided to do the right thing in the right moment. I think we all can do that in our own space, and that's what makes you great. Each of
Well,
us.
and speaking of our space, I really want to try to spend the remaining, part of our discussion speaking into the hearts and the minds of a few categories of people. Right? There's your coworkers, there's your significant others, your children, your friends and family, those who have supported you. And let's start, Josh, with the relationships at home. So when you have somebody who is close to you, as a family member, phone calls from aunts and cousins and sisters and whoever, and your mom, what do you need to hear from them in this space right now? Because they're trying to help.
I think it's important for us to, especially in our homes, to continue these conversations. That would be the most, for me, the most important thing is to not shy away from these conversations that we're having, especially in the home, because in the home, you're able to speak freely. You're able to really dig down deep into these issues that have been around for years. I just, just buried my grandfather, who was blessed to see 92 years 2 weeks ago. So he was blessed to see 92 years. But my grandfather was born in 1928. So guess what that means? Think about his parents, like think about how, and I was just sitting there thinking, I'm at the funeral and like a day later, I'm like, my, my grandfather wasn't a slave, but his parents were probably around that, like either his parents, but his definitely his grandparents. So when you look at how close our generations are and how we're not really far removed from slavery, but yet we're being told to get over it. And we didn't do this, and this isn't our problem, and we're not responsible. And when you talk about the conversations that need to be had, I believe that it is very important as Black people, Black men, Black women in general, to teach your children Black history. That is so important because I've even met other other brothers who have no idea who Marvin Gaye is, no idea who Aretha Franklin is, Thurgood Marshall, or all kinds of people in Black history. They don't even know just the Michael Jackson and what he did for our culture. These things are important that need to be passed on to generations after us. Why? Because one, they're not going to teach it in our schools. So when we talk about what needs to be discussed from our women and and from parents in general, have these conversations, nurture those relationships, cultivate the next generation to understand who their ancestors were and what they contributed to our world. That's extremely important because we cannot allow our history to be forgotten because our country doesn't want us to remember.
Absolutely. Howard, weigh in on this. What do you need your family, your coworkers? Like, what do you need to hear from them right now in this space and in this time? Oh, unmute yourself.
I think I really just want to know that they uh, respect what they respect me as an individual. They respect what I may be going through. That they respect, um, uh, it's always been about respect. My perspective is having come into the workforce on the tail end of the 70s in 1980. And so I was coming into a workforce and as an engineer, where I was the only person of color in so many situations. And what I wanted most from my coworkers at that time, early in my career, when there were so few of us in technical fields, was respect.
Mm.
And I wanted their respect. I wanted them to treat me as an equal. And I wanted them to understand that um, I didn't need them to necessarily know my whole history, but understand that, I am someone who was educated and who can, uh, I have the same capabilities that they have. And so respect me for who I am, respect me for the place that I'm in, the space that I'm operating in, and don't dismiss me. Don't marginalize me. Don't put me in a corner because you think less of me. Just understand that I'm not only a human being, but I'm an educated man and I have experience and I have value. And so when I hear that from my coworkers, I'm good. I don't need them to, love me and we sit down and have tea. Just value me. That's That's what I want. I mean, we all want that. We want that from family. We want that from everybody that we meet. But if we're talking about coworkers, that's the sweet spot for me. Value who I am as an individual.
That's good stuff, Reverend Taylor. I know that you do a lot of counseling now, in your role. You're counseling people, you're encouraging people. What kind of messages do we need to hear right now, with respect? And I'm talking about Black men, specifically. What kind of messaging do we need to hear?
Yeah, I think it's important to have dialogues like this. Nobody understands what it's like to be a Black man, but a Black man. People can talk about, what your reality should be, but we know what we deal with. We know I'm 42 in a couple days. I'll be 42, and I still, if I see law enforcement, I still feel a certain way, and I know I'm not the only one who feel that way, even though I've done nothing wrong. So I think from the clergy, we have to speak reality. We have to make sure that our messages relate to what people are dealing with. And we have to just have honest conversations. Um, in our households, again, we have to get back to just reality. There is a target on Black men, whether people wants to admit it or not. There is a target, and we have to deal with that. We have to accept that. And until we can have those honest conversations, it's hard to move forward, if we just continue to ignore it. So I think the dialogues are important. I think, again, from the churches, we have to have conversations that are real. The messages, they have to be relevant to what we're dealing with in order for us to truly move forward as a people.
That's good stuff. Hey, Demark, what can it be too much? The phone calls, the notes, the messages, the family members that are trying to help. I mean, right now, men have a tendency to kind of go off, sometimes in a corner and just kind of be by ourselves. Is that indicative of what's happening now? Are people trying to do too much, or what's that line? Like what's the bridge too far for wanting to show concern?
For other people trying to show us concern. Um, yeah, that's hard, right? Because and I think Brother Harris spoke to this a second ago. How you perceive that reaching out is going to be based on how I perceived you before this moment,
Mhm.
right? And I think when you talk about allyship, so it's really important to actually be allies. It's going to come across a touch. I'm going to have a difficult time figuring out how genuine you are if you never asked me how I'm doing before in a genuine way. Then all of a sudden, when it's the soup du jour, I'm gonna have it's gonna be confusing. It's gonna be more difficult, I guess. Do you really care how I feel today, or is it just like the thing to do? And I think that's one of the challenges with this entire space. I think you were talking earlier about woke culture. Is do you care, or do you care to say that you care, which is exponentially different. But by and large, I think as people reach out to us as Black men, respect our space. If we're a share and we want to share, respect that. If we have a particular way we want to share, respect that. And candidly, if we don't feel like telling you, respect that. We don't owe anybody our pain. We don't owe anybody any descriptions. We don't even owe a public conversation like this. We can do that, but we don't owe that. And I think it's really important. And respectfully to all of us, none of us are the singular spokesperson for Black people. So we don't have to hold this burden or this expectation that keeps coming into our space. Well, hey man, tell me how Black people feel. I can tell you how Demark feels. I can give you a reasonable idea of what my space feels, but by and large, I would say we feel all type of ways, and I think they're all valid. And I think somebody said earlier, respect our opinions as a group. So I mean, so I think that I do get that people want to reach out. Um, I do think it's really important as you reach out and let's be honest, everyone who reaches out is not reaching out from a friendly basis. I know I can't speak for you guys. I know I have people in my space who at least project that they think that we're wrong.
Mm.
I mean, you're getting these messages that, uh, hey, y'all are off this. You're not even having this problem, you know. And you get people or people who seem to have a difficult time understanding. Particularly when you start merging culture, politics. Oh, that's the mainstream media telling you this thing. And so, as you reach out, at the least, uh, respect the fact that we're telling you this is what we're going. And I think it's very much true. It's a deep point of privilege to tell someone your pain isn't even real. That is some type of figment of imagination. So I think that. But and I do want to say this. I know we touched on time. I think as brothers, I think we should remind ourselves. Yes, it's great that people reach out, but everybody protect your peace, and everybody realizes black men. I think Brother Ben said it earlier. The home is probably the best place. The people that you're the closest to. I think we all said this, but I would be remiss. I'm not a big crier. Well, I am, but I only cry about my kids. Anybody who knows me knows that. And so I haven't really cried over a lot of this stuff until my boys were watching me watch one of these tapes. I was
Mm.
just watching, and my sons there. I think Brother Taker's sons are your child 7. My boys are 6. They just turned 6, and I'm watching it, and it just became tough. It took me about 20 minutes to stop crying, and I'm not really a crier like that. Not about random stuff. And that's my thing. And I don't mind sharing that in this moment, but I just tell everybody. I think Brother Ben made a great point earlier. Have that peace in your space. Have it with people that you can trust, people that you can be complex with and work it out. And as you choose to share that with other people, that's your own decision. Um, and if you're so called to do it, share. And if not, don't.
That's
And I want to say that.
no, and it's a great hard stop for us because I think you made a very, very key point, which is whether you are a crier or not a crier, now is the time. If we're gonna cry, then we're gonna cry. Like you're gonna have to meet us where we are. And that's really the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, because I know that there are people who are close to us. There are people in our circle that want to help. There are people who want to say the right thing. They want to be allies and they want to be advocates for us. And sometimes they don't know how. And what I'm hearing from all of you is that there is no one singular spokesperson for what all Black men are feeling. We're all going through this the best way we possibly can. I just wanted to just take a moment to thank each and every one of you. I know that I don't count it robbery that you would take out an hour of your Saturday afternoon to come and share. Hopefully, people will share our video and they'll share this conversation. We just want this to be the beginning of ongoing conversations around Black men. Some of us are not okay. Some of us are doing better than others. But at the end of the day, just respect us for where we are. So, guys, I really appreciate it. Hopefully you will come and join us again for a future show. We'd like to have you guys back on. This has been the Soul Purpose Show. I've been hanging out by myself. My wife let me do this every once in a while, so I have to take advantage of it. But this is if anybody ever needs Demark, please reach out to him at the National Southern Christian Leadership Conference, D. Liggins at nationalsclc.org. That's all we have for now. Peace.